Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now about Jayden Daniels following in the footsteps of Joe Burrow at LSU, what he said about that. And then on Monday, I did a little oral history on Jayden Daniels' big game, his record-setting game, historic game against Florida last year. And I think you'll enjoy it because it talks a lot about the skills that made him so enticing to the NFL and the Washington Commanders in particular. So that'll come out Monday. So anyways, in a minute, I'll be joined by my ESPN colleague in Cincinnati, Ben Baby, as we discuss the Bengals. He gives us all really good intel on the Bengals, what you can expect, where they are vulnerable, why they are vulnerable, and what you can expect from that offense. Now, when we recorded this on, I believe it was Tuesday or Wednesday morning, we hadn't really been to practices yet, but we recorded early in the week as we subsequently had practiced. Like one of the guys that we talked about was T. Higgins. Would he play? And I think even Ben said at that time it was kind of trending that way, and it certainly looks like it continues to trend toward Higgins playing, and it could make a huge difference in that pass game for Cincinnati because teams have put so much emphasis on covering up Jamar Chase. And Chase has not had a big game so far, but he will be targeted. And if Higgins is out there, it just gives Joe Burrow another weapon to look for. But they're also kind of banged up on the defensive line. So check ESPN.com for the injury updates. Ben Baby, you can find him as well on Twitter. So anyway, as far as Washington's injury update is for after Friday's practice, Dorrance Armstrong was limited. Cleveland Farrell was limited. Emmanuel Forbes was limited. Now, I watched him go through some stuff during like a special teams drill where he and Benjamin St-Juste were just kind of working on different there's multiple ways to jam a guy. I'm going to get this on late another time, and so they were kind of working on different ways and jams, but also covering in certain particular routes that they may have to cover on Monday. So he was working through some of that. So, but he was listed as limited. St-Juste was also limited as well. He has a groin. I don't get the sense that he's going to be an issue for Monday. And then Johnny Newton was limited. Now I will say, like, he did not practice on Wednesday or Thursday, excuse me. They certainly are bringing him along very slowly. So I don't know what the quote unquote pitch count is for him on Monday. It'll be more than 12, which he had last week, and they needed him to play more than that. But the fact that he's continued to be limited, I think he's healthy, and I think they're being very cautious, but it also takes away those extra reps, and that dude needs a lot of reps. But I did watch him today go through some of the work in one-on-ones. They've been doing a lot more one-on-ones with the D-line and the O-line. He was able to participate in that, and that's where you're going kind of hard as well. So the fact that he was doing that, he's fine. I just think they're being very cautious with him, and I think the hard part is his first game action was not in a joint practice. It was not in a preseason game. It was in a regular season NFL game. He just doesn't have enough experience yet to really kind of lean on, and he just needs all those reps he can get. But getting those one-on-one reps, and it was just a few, it was a handful, but he did get them. And there are a couple times he did pretty well. So we were going to have a video posted on the shorts section with Johnny Newton having some reps. We also have some of Allen and Payne getting some reps yesterday. And we'll have a couple others up there too. I think, based on what they're working on, you can kind of tell like what's an emphasis. And one of the emphasis for the running back, one of the points of emphasis was chipping and then getting out on your route. So look for some of that Monday. There you go. The rest of the injury report then is Brandon Coleman was full, Quan Martin was full. So there you go. Just wanted to give you the injury update too. Again, hey, that's it. That's it for me. I got nothing else. I will be doing a 5 things I think for Sunday morning. So check that out. And I'm going to just try to provide intel on some insight into certain things that are going on, various aspects of the team, and then also what I've seen, what I've learned in watching the Bengals, talking to people about the Bengals, what to expect from them on Monday. So just to get you ready for the game. So that'll come out Sunday. Anyway, that's it from me. Here's my conversation with ESPN's Ben Baby. All right, Ben. Well, it seems like every year the Bengals get off to a bad start. This year is no exception. What happens in there, and then how do they turn around? Because they've turned around each year pretty much. So what are you anticipating from them there? Why are they in this hole, and how do they turn around?
Yeah, this is kind of a more unique situation. And also, it has some similarities to what we've seen in the past, right? Well, when you look at some of the previous slow starts, and to be clear, this is the fifth time in Zach Taylor's 6 years that they've started the year 0-2. They have yet to win a week 2 game, which is still a crazy stat for a head coach in his sixth season. And a lot of those times when you look at it, it goes back to Joe Burrow just not being healthy, whether it's the ACL that he suffered against Washington, first time he's playing Washington since he tore that ACL his rookie season, whether it was his appendix, whether it was his calf, whether it was now his wrist. There are injuries that generally are affecting him going into week 1. And we saw that manifest this year when they lost to the Patriots. And then, when you look at it, they had a tough week 2 opponent in Kansas City, a game that is normally on the back end of the schedule for them. I think when you look at it, it worked out. Last year, the Bengals or the NFL did not get a Mahomes Burrow matchup late in the year because Burrow was hurt. This year, he was healthy for that game because it was so early in the year. And so that goes into maybe the 0-2 start. But inside that locker room, there doesn't seem to be a ton of panic. They seem to be encouraged with how they played. They were maybe a penalty or a couple plays away from winning at Kansas City, which was huge given that they had one of the worst losses we've seen in quite some time to the Patriots in week 1. But that's kind of how they've started, but they do feel like they're in a good spot at this moment.
How is Burrow? Because again, there, like you said, always some health concerns, and he's coming off the surgery and all that. So where is he at right now?
Yeah, when I asked him about it going into last week, he said the wrist feels better than it did a week earlier going into the year, and it's going to continue to feel better. And then I asked him after the game, and he said that was definitely the best he's felt throwing the ball since the surgery. You can definitely tell he looked more comfortable in the pocket, and they seem to indicate that as time continues to go on, he'll feel better, and we'll see kind of if that remains to be true. There's also, I think, something to note in that the more he throws on it, just me looking at him, you can tell there is a difference the more that he throws. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. And that's why what we saw in that Kansas City game was so huge because, he had a couple deep balls, one particularly to Jermaine Burton. That was the longest completion that he had. That's the most I've seen him personally attack the field going back to either the week 1, the joint practices, even just regular practices. It had been quite some time, and I think that's what you really wanted to see. So that is probably the most encouraging thing about how Burrow has looked. But I think every indication is that it's going to continue to take time for him to really feel good, and you'll maybe see the Joe that we're used to seeing.
And then they've obviously kind of the offensive line there is always a factor for him. How has that been going? And it seems like teams are they blitzing them a little bit more? Is that kind of where they're struggling a little bit at all?
It's really interesting. So our metrics at ESPN, they've never really liked the Bengals pass blocking situation. Right. And it's kind of matched up to what we've seen on the field and what the tape's shown us. But I think that we have them right now going into the Monday night game. It was the 5th best pass blocking group in the league, according to ESPN stats and info, when we look at our pass block win rate. And that shows you, and when you look at the tape, Joe has had relatively clean pockets. Now, Chris Jones did wreak a lot of havoc in there, but I think Burrow's pass protection has been the best it's been, and the numbers bear that out. And so we'll see if they're able to run the ball a little bit better, if they're able to stretch the field. I think that's going to help with Burrow's pass protection. But I think when you look at the upgrades they've made, they bring in Trent Brown as a backup, and Amarius Mims could be back for this game against Washington. Looked really, really good in OTAs, in training camp, and a guy they feel like has a really, really high ceiling. I think Burrow gave him an A+ on how he looked at right tackle. Orlando Brown at left tackle had a perfect pass block win rate for the first 2 weeks of the year, really playing well. So the pass protection is probably the best it's been. And that's been really good for a team that needs to have better protection for Burrow, but also need the time to get those long developing passing plays that they've just lacked the last couple of years.
You brought up the run game. No Joe Mixon. Now it's Zach Moss. I know I see the numbers. What does it look like with him? How is it different without Mixon?
It's interesting going into this year, John, because I think a lot of us thought the run game would be better. Mixon just wasn't really that good in the situations they needed him to be in, was not good against light boxes, wasn't good at making guys miss and getting yards after contact like he was in previous years. That's why we're all kind of taken aback when we looked at what he did in Houston week 1. Right. I said, this guy doesn't look like the same guy that we're used to seeing the last couple of years. And Mixon might have been the big winner in the offseason going to a Houston team that has a lot of good players, CJ Stroud on the up and up. I know you're an Ohio State guy, so I know you probably very interested to see how Stroud looks over there. But it's the run game hasn't materialized in Cincinnati like we thought it would through the first couple of weeks. When you look at their run yards over expectation, one of the worst numbers in the league. I do think the success rate has been favorable, so they're getting what they need to, but the run game just needs to be more explosive. Now, a couple of things. Is that a byproduct of teams maybe forcing Joe Burrow to throw the ball down the field, not giving them as many light boxes as we're used to seeing? I think that could be a factor here. But I think there's still a lot of optimism about Zach Moss, what he brings, especially how he is in shotgun run situations. Chase Brown, a really explosive guy. So I think it's still out on if it's really going to be better than it was a year ago. And I still believe that the likelihood is going to be higher when you see how much more Mixon, we'll see how he continues to look in Houston and how Zach and Chase look in Cincinnati. And I think that's going to raise an interesting question long-term over whether it's the back that's an issue or maybe perhaps a scheme issue that's preventing the run game from being better.
So then receivers, T. Higgins, what's his availability for this week?
Yeah, I think that's something we're going to continue to monitor as we go through the week. T was making good progress. Zach Taylor said as much in his press conference on Monday. And T's a guy that really wants to be back on the field. And when you pair him up with Jamar Chase, one of the best 1-2 combinations in the league. And so T had a really good camp before he tweaked his hamstring a few days before week 1. And a guy who's dealt with hamstring issues in the past. And it's one of the reasons why the Bengals placed him on that franchise tag and a little hesitant to give him that long-term deal. So T. Higgins, I would expect as we go through the week that as long as he doesn't have any setbacks, the likelihood of him playing, I believe, should be pretty good. He went through pregame warmups on Sunday, even though he wasn't playing. Zach didn't want to rule him out going into that game and continue to say he's making good progress as they get ready. And he made a point to say that having the extra off day this week because the Bengals in Washington, they're playing on Monday night, that bodes well in his favor. So that could mean that Washington secondary that's had some issues these first couple of weeks, they might end up having to face T. Higgins for the first time this season.
And that is not what they need to do right now. I can tell you that. Without obviously the other side, Jamar Chase, 10 for 97 so far. You kind of expecting bigger numbers from him. First of all, the contract dispute, any lingering issues, and then 2, what's the impact on Higgins not being out there on Chase?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, John, when you look at the contract situation. And we saw Jamar Chase blow up in that Kansas City game, got a flag for a 15-yard penalty with the ref called abusive language. I was trying to figure out what he said. The ref said, I can't repeat it. So, I'll leave that for what it is. But I wonder, how much of that is lingering frustration. And that's something that only Jamar can answer. And I asked Zach about that, on Monday. And I said, how much of maybe all of the off the field stuff is playing into the on the field stuff? And he said, that's something you've got to ask Jamar. That's really something only he knows. And I think that's something that will continue to maybe play itself out. We may get more information. I thought the report that Adam Schefter had on Saturday night before the game was very interesting, in that Jamar Chase felt misled about the negotiations and that they weren't going to continue them. Now, as a caveat to that, the Bengals don't really do negotiations. So who breaks it off first, I think that's immaterial into the fact that there probably isn't going to be a deal done during the regular season, which was stated by the front office months ago that probably wasn't going to be the case. And so I wonder, Jamar, I think, will be professional enough to try to put this behind him as best as he can. But we've seen in the past in Cincinnati where players who don't get deals done generally don't play that well. T. Higgins had, he wanted a deal done before last season. That didn't happen. He was not thrilled about it. He still played, but, he dealt with probably a higher drop rate than we're used to seeing, didn't have the same production. Jesse Bates pointed that out. And really, when the Bengals made that Super Bowl run, he did not have the same year that he had, at the back half of the year. And he admitted that having to manage that contract situation was a big impact. And as you see, he played better at the end of that season once he was able to really put it behind him. And then now that he's with Atlanta, he might be the best safety in the league. The contract's behind him. He's not able to think about that. So I think that's something that you have to think about with Ja'Marr Chase.
And he's still, regardless of his contract, he's going to be a tough matchup for this team because they're just going to have a hard time defending some receivers. What makes him so good when he's on?
One of the things that is really one of the things that I underestimated when he came into the league was that Ja'Marr is so physical and yet so fast. That combination of speed and power, you just do not see in a lot of receivers. So if you try to press him, try to jam him at the line of scrimmage, he's going to be a really difficult guy to press and jam to get him off his release. And then he's able to run past you. He's got a lot of speed. And then, Lou Anarumo made a good point, the Bengals defensive coordinator, and said when he gets the ball in his hands, he's almost like a running back and how hard he is to bring down, how effective he is in space. And that makes him such a tough matchup. He's not a finesse receiver or a guy who's really fast, but maybe doesn't have a lot of weight to him. He's a really tough guy to bring down and presents a lot of yak problems in getting those yards after the catch. So that's what makes him a really tough guy. And I think something that gets underestimated is how smart he is and how his ability to understand what defenses are trying to do. He can see what leverages are happening, not only immediately, but when you get to that second level, that safety that may be playing him to cloud him, to bracket him, how he may need to break off, for example, a bench route, and he may need to make that not as shallow and maybe carry that a little bit farther to make sure that he gives his quarterback a window. And in my opinion, that's really the nuance of an NFL receiver, that when you having somebody who's smart enough to know how to set up defenders, not only at the first level, but the second level, and how to create that window to create that extra half a yard for your quarterback to get that ball in. That's what makes him so good and why he believes he's one of the best receivers in the league.
It's a lot of LSU talent in this game.
No doubt.
Speaking of that, so we were talking beforehand, what is the word on Jaden Daniels in Cincinnati?
Yeah, I think the sentiment inside the locker room is much like it is around the league, John. And a lot of guys think he might be the best quarterback in this rookie class, even above Caleb Williams. And Lou Anarumo pointed out that on tape, yeah, he's really good with his legs, but has a lot of poise, a smart quarterback. And there's a lot of measurables there that you like. And I think that's why he was such an intriguing prospect coming out of LSU. And really, it's almost interesting when you look at how much it mirrors Burrow coming out of LSU, because he's a guy who transferred in, played really well at the back end, and also had two really good receivers in his time at LSU. With Joe, it was Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr. And, for Jaden, I really liked Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. I was been a Biletnikoff voter these last few years. And so keeping an eye on those receivers, you looked at it, Thomas and Neighbors put up a ton of numbers. And then you look at what Daniels was able to do. It's really easy to see why that was such a good offense at LSU. And when you look at what he has around him in Washington, he has the capability to have a really strong year. I was talking to our boxing guy, Mike Coppinger, who is a diehard Commanders fan. And he is all about the Commanders. And he was giving me the breakdown. And I told him, I said, listen, man, I think this offense has a chance to be really good eventually when you look at what they have. You look at the run game, which could give the Bengals a ton of big problems on Sunday because they're depleted in the interior. You look at the receivers. I think that Terry McLaurin is a guy who is a very good asset to have for a quarterback. And so I think that they understand that Daniels is a guy who can pose some problems for them if they're able to be better in the red zone and just be more effective than they have been maybe these first couple of weeks.
And that's right. Just a couple more minutes. And I want to touch on that because the D tackles are banged up. They had to sign Lawrence Guy earlier in the week. What is it? Is that the big issue there? What is the issue in the run game? How vulnerable are they there?
Yeah, that was always going to be the question mark with this defense. They let DJ Reader walk in free agency. They bring in Sheldon Rankins. I think when you look at what they wanted to do, they wanted to try to get a more disruptive pass rush from the interior. Rankins is a guy who does that. And they said, you know what, we'll maybe sacrifice on not having as good of a run stopper in the middle if we're going to get somebody who can be more explosive in the pass rush. And Rankins injured his hamstring. BJ Hill has been dealing with injuries. So right now you have Chris Jenkins, who's dealing with a thumb issue, a rookie out of Michigan, McKinley Jackson on IR, another rookie defensive tackle. So you've had, maybe Sam Hubbard, another Ohio State guy, playing in the interior. And he joked with me, it's almost like going back to 2020. He said it's a throwback having me go from edge to playing tackle just because we need some bodies in there. So Lawrence Guy gives them a little extra depth. But even if when they were healthy, that was not a unit that was particularly great against the run. And you're asking your backers to really do a lot, Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt. So I think that's going to be the big matchup. Brian Robinson coming off a career high 133 yards. They add in Austin Eckler in the mix, a guy who can do a little bit of both. I think that's going to be a big matchup. And if you're the Bengals, you've got to be able to stop the run. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of shortened possessions. You're going to be more vulnerable. And it's much like the recipe for disaster that they saw against New England, a team that was able to run the ball really well. They were able to be better in not having as many missed tackles. So I think that's something that bodes well for Cincinnati. But yeah, that matchup in the trenches will definitely be the one to watch, in my opinion, in this game.
And then the last one, the pass rush, Hendrickson. How good?
John, Washington fans, you might want to cover your ears a little bit, but Trey Hendrickson is, for my money right now, might be the best edge rusher in the league. And when you look at his win rate numbers, he's been number one in edge pass rush win rate as an edge rusher out of everybody in the league. Seeing how that converts to sacks, we saw that get a little bit better in week 2, but his win rate numbers have been up there the last couple of years. He was, I believe, tied in the AFC lead in sacks last season, a guy who maybe flies under the radar because, quite frankly, he doesn't really do a ton of media. And so I think that maybe hurts how he's perceived by the public, but I think everyone knows how good he is. I asked Lou on Monday, I said, have you ever had an edge rusher that was so good you had back-to-back left tackles benched and one, even considering retirement after the Patriots game. So, we'll see. I know Washington Cop also gave me the lowdown. He said, the left tackle situation, not really ideal right now for Washington. And I think that's a thing you're going to have to contend with is where do they stand there? Because Trey is going to give you a ton of fits. He's going to be really disruptive. And if you're Washington offensively, that's the only thing you have to do is neutralize Trey Hendrickson and figure out how you go from there, because that's going to dictate how you play offensively.
Awesome. Ben, great intel. Thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate you.
Thanks to Ben for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. Like I said, I'll be back on Sunday morning with another episode. 5 things I think, things that I've learned throughout the week, things that I think could happen in the game. There you go. I'll talk to you next time.